Imagine accidentally taking a bite of your roommate's leftovers from the fridge.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right.
Yeah.
But instead of just, replacing the container
Yeah.
or saying sorry, you are legally required to buy them a whole new meal, pay a 20% penalty fee, and undergo this intense ritual cleansing just to be allowed back in the house.
That is quite the lease agreement.
Yeah, exactly. Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
And, before we even begin today, I just want to start by saying, may God profoundly bless your day-to-day. And may his grace, peace, and wisdom just be with you throughout this entire week. It is an absolute joy to have you here with us.
It really is a joy to dive into this with you because, usually when we encounter ancient historical texts,
Especially those endless lists of rules.
right, the rules,
Right.
we tend to treat them like dusty artifacts behind thick museum glass. We just look for these quick modern applications, and when the text resists that, we just sort of skim past it.
Yeah, we totally do. But today we are stepping into the world of Leviticus, specifically chapter 22. And, well, that museum glass just shatters completely here.
Oh, completely.
We're looking at this landscape of rules that feels, on the surface, incredibly intense. But it becomes surprisingly relevant once you crack the underlying code.
Yeah, and to crack that code, we have some great tools today.
We do. For this deep dive, we are pulling excerpts and study notes from two really distinct scholarly resources.
Yeah.
First, we've got the Holman Study Bible, which is great because it connects these ancient laws to broader theological narrative.
Which is so helpful.
It is. And then we're also looking at the Nova Almeida Actualizada, the NAA Study Bible. And their notes are just brilliant at unpacking the linguistic and cultural nuances of the text.
Yeah, setting the stage with those specific lenses is crucial because if you read Leviticus 22 entirely on the surface, it sounds like an impossibly strict HR manual for ancient priests.
Like the worst HR department ever.
Exactly, but it's actually this meticulously designed architectural system. The entire goal of these chapters is to protect the sanctity of the relationship between the Israelites and the divine.
Okay, so what's the foundation of that system?
Well, the foundational premise is that God is utterly holy, and approaching that holiness requires profound intention.
Right, which means we can't even talk about the sacred food itself yet, like
Yeah.
the actual animal sacrifices. First, we have to look at the people authorized to handle it, the priests.
Yeah, the rules for the priests.
The conditions they had to meet just to approach the sacred table are staggering. They had to be in a state of absolute ceremonial cleanliness.
Yeah, the text outlines very specific ways a priest could become impure. And it's a fascinating list, honestly.
Like what? What makes them impure?
Well, we're talking about things like skin diseases, leprosy, for example, bodily discharges, or even just touching something unclean like a human corpse or a creeping thing.
Wait, a creeping thing.
Yeah, meaning reptiles or certain swarming insects. If you touch them, you're out.
Wow. Okay, so the natural assumption for a modern reader is to view this as like an ancient hygiene protocol, right? Just avoiding germs.
That's usually the go-to explanation, yeah.
But reading through the study notes, it becomes clear this isn't just about avoiding germs. It's almost like a spiritual clean room or, a highly sterile operating theater.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, because you don't just walk in off the street in your muddy shoes to perform open-heart surgery.
Right. The operating theater analogy is perfect because the stakes in both scenarios are existential. To the ancient Near Eastern mind, things like skin diseases, bodily discharges, or a corpse, they weren't just physically dirty.
What were they then?
They were profound symbols of mortality. They regulated the breakdown of the body, the loss of life force, or death itself. And because God is the ultimate author of life, anything associated with the realm of death is fundamentally incompatible with the divine presence.
Incompatible. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. The NEA study notes actually highlight a specific phrase used in this chapter that illustrates the danger. It says, eliminated from my presence.
That is a terrifying phrase.
It really is. So if a priest approached the sacred offerings while carrying the symbolic weight of death or impurity, it wasn't just a minor infraction. It meant the layman would be cut off from the people, and the priest would be exiled from the tabernacle.
Basically spiritual and social death.
Exactly.
But there is a remedy, right, for temporary impurity, like, say, touching a creeping thing. It involved washing the body entirely in water and then waiting for the sun to set.
Waiting for the sunset.
Yeah. Only then could the priest eat the sacred food again.
That sunset detail acts like a temporal reset button. If the tabernacle is the sterile operating room, the sun setting is like waiting for the final UV light sterilization cycle to complete.
That's exactly it.
The room isn't safe to re-enter until that natural cycle finishes and a brand new day begins on the ancient calendar.
Right. And the overarching dynamic in Leviticus is that impurity is highly contagious. Like, if you touch something unclean, you become unclean. The pure must constantly build walls to protect itself from the impure.
Build walls, right.
But the Holman study notes explicitly draw this really fascinating contrast between this ancient containment protocol and what happens later in the biblical narrative, specifically with Jesus.
Oh, this is such a good point. Because Jesus essentially operates as an antivirus,
Yeah.
rather than someone just avoiding the disease.
Yes.
Instead of retreating behind the clean room doors to stay pure, he actively seeks out the sick. He touches the lepers and embraces the marginalized.
He completely reverses the flow of contagion. His purity becomes contagious. He's healing the impurity upon contact rather than being contaminated by it.
That is wild to think about.
It really is a total paradigm shift. It goes from guarding the sacred to deploying the sacred to heal the broken. But, in the historical context of Leviticus 22, the Israelites were still operating under the strict necessity of shielding the holy.
Shielding it, right. But practically speaking, maintaining that level of total shielded purity creates a massive logistical headache.
Oh, huge.
Because a priest still has to feed his family. If this holy food is practically radioactive with sacredness, how does he bring it home to the dinner table?
That is the big question.
The rules dictating who can and cannot eat the sacred offerings reveal a surprisingly complex definition of what constitutes a household.
Yeah, the dividing line of the household really challenges our modern sensibilities. The text states that no strangers, no temporary guests, and no hired day laborers of the priest are allowed to eat the sacred offerings.
Wait, really? No day laborers?
None. However, slaves bought with the priest's money, or servants born in his house, are granted full access to the holy food.
Okay, so you're telling me an ancient day laborer who we'd consider a standard paid employee gets excluded, while a purchased slave gets to eat the sacred food.
That's what the text says, yeah.
That feels entirely backward to a modern sense of fairness. But looking closely at the cultural context, it seems this is less like an employment contract and more like a highly exclusive family trust.
Yes, exactly.
The defining metric isn't social freedom, it's absolute dependence.
That is the crucial distinction right there. The day laborer has their own household. They work for the priest during the day, they receive their wages, and they return to their own family's protection at night.
They have their own safety net.
Right. But the servant born in the house is entirely dependent on the priest's household for their survival. They are grafted into the family unit. The sacred provision covers everyone who is permanently sheltered under the umbrella of the priest's identity.
We see that umbrella identity play out even more dramatically with the rules regarding a priest's daughter.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
It is. If she marries a layman, someone outside the priesthood, she immediately loses her access to the sacred food. She transfers to her new husband's household.
She's under a new umbrella.
Exactly. But the text adds this incredible safety net. If she becomes widowed or divorced, has no children, and returns to her father's house, she regains her seat at the sacred table.
Because if she has children, her late husband's lineage and property would theoretically provide for her under ancient law.
Right.
But if she's left entirely destitute, the boundaries of the sacred household open back up to absorb her. She returns to the state of dependence on her father, and therefore she is covered by the sacred provision once again.
Wow.
It redefines belonging based on vulnerability and permanence.
Which actually brings us back to that roommate's leftover food scenario we mentioned at the very start of the show.
Ah, yes, the leftover tax.
Yeah. The text has a specific provision for someone who is outside that household umbrella. So like a visiting neighbor, perhaps, who just accidentally eats a piece of the sacred food.
What happens to them?
They must replace the food, add a 20% penalty, a fifth of its value, and give it all to the priest.
That is an economic restitution that feels surprisingly steep for an honest mistake.
It really does. I mean, isn't it a bit harsh to charge someone a 20% late fee for an accidental snack?
It sounds harsh, yeah. But it acts as a behavioral tax. It essentially forces the whole neighborhood to treat the priest's pantry like a hazard zone.
A hazard zone, I love that.
You can never casually snack at the priest's house because the financial risk of a mix-up is just too high.
Right.
The 20% restitution ensures that the boundary between the common and the sacred remains highly visible. It creates unnecessary social friction. Meaning, if the penalty were simply replacing the item, someone could easily brush it off. They'd say, oops, my mistake, and treat the holy things of God like ordinary leftovers.
Oh, yeah. No big deal.
Exactly. The added cost reinforces the weight of the sacred. It trains the entire community to pay very close attention to what they are consuming and exactly where it came from.
So we have the priests scrubbed in, and we know exactly who is allowed inside the household to eat.
Yeah.
Now we need to examine the food itself, the strict quality control of the animal sacrifices. And the standard the text demands is absolute perfection.
No corners cut.
0. Any animal offered to God must be strictly without defect. No blind animals, no injured or mutilated animals, and absolutely none with running sores or scabs.
And it gets even stricter. The text goes so far as to strictly prohibit castrated animals or defective animals purchased from foreigners.
So you can't outsource your defective offerings.
Oh.
You can't find a loophole by importing a damaged animal from a neighboring nation and claiming, well, it didn't come from my personal flock.
They thought of every loophole. The requirement for the unblemished best is relentless. But the NAA study notes highlight a really fascinating theological nuance in verse 23.
Oh, yeah, the exception.
Right, there's this tiny, highly specific exception. An animal with a deformed or stunted limb can be accepted as a free will offering, but absolutely not as a vow offering.
So what does this all mean? Why is a deformed limb okay if you're just volunteering a gift, but completely unacceptable if you're fulfilling a promise?
It's a striking difference in legal weight. If you make a vow, say, promising a sacrifice if God delivers you from an illness, you are entering into a binding legal and spiritual contract.
Okay.
You owe a debt. To try and pay off that grand debt with a defective animal is like handing a counterfeit bill to the divine sovereign.
Oh, wow.
It treats the creator with less respect than you would treat a local tax collector.
So the defective animal in the context of a vow is considered profane or incomplete. The contract demands absolute perfection.
Exactly. But a free will offering operates on a completely different emotional and spiritual frequency.
Because it's not required.
Right. It is not fulfilling a debt. It is a spontaneous, voluntary expression of love or gratitude. And because the nature of the gift is spontaneous affection, the strictness of the law allows a slight margin of grace.
That's beautiful.
It really is. The pure intention of the heart in a free will offering makes room for a slight physical imperfection in the animal.
The binding contract demands perfection, but the spontaneous gift of love allows for grace. I love that distinction. And the Holman notes take this entire system of unblemished animals and draw a direct line to its ultimate theological conclusion.
They do, yeah.
Every single time an ancient Israelite brought a flawless lamb to the altar, they were essentially acting out a prophecy. The New Testament teaches that the ultimate unblemished sacrifice was Jesus.
Right.
The physical perfection required in Leviticus was merely a shadow of the moral and spiritual perfection of the ultimate sacrifice that would permanently fulfill this requirement for the covenant community.
It served as a daily, visceral reminder to the community of what true purity actually costs.
Which introduces a completely different dimension to these rules. Because beyond the physical perfection of the animal's body, Chapter 22 introduces a temporal, almost ethical dimension to when and how these sacrifices can happen.
And Pearl, how so?
Well, it is not just about examining the animal for scabs or broken limbs. It's about respecting its biological life cycle.
Oh, right, the timelines.
Yeah. The text mandates what we can call the 8-day rule. When a calf, a lamb, or a goat is born, it must remain with its mother for 7 days. It is only acceptable as an offering from the 8th day onward.
And directly following that is a rule strictly forbidding the slaughter of a cow or a sheep and its young on the exact same day.
Right. But wait, why force them into this specific waiting period? On the surface, this feels like an incredibly specific micromanagement of agricultural time. Why the 8-day waiting period for newborns?
It does seem super specific, but the NWA study notes provide two really compelling theories that reveal a profound underlying ethic here.
Okay, lay them on me.
The first theory views the 8-day rule as a direct polemic against the surrounding culture. The neighboring Canaanite nations had fertility rituals that likely involved the immediate sacrifice of newborns.
Oh, wow. So Israel was commanded to do the exact opposite.
Exactly, to establish a distinct countercultural identity.
That makes a lot of sense. What's the second theory?
The second theory is even more profound, honestly. It connects the rule back to the very beginning of the biblical narrative. Waiting 7 days reflects the 7 days of creation.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
By allowing the newborn animal to remain with its mother for a full 7-day cycle, the Israelites were granting that animal a complete cycle of early life. It demonstrates a deep, divine respect for the bond between mother and offspring.
It injects an element of deep compassion into a system of death.
It really does.
I mean, the animal is ultimately destined for the altar,
Yeah.
but you cannot treat it like a machine. You have to honor its biological reality. You cannot slaughter the mother and the baby on the same day.
Yeah, even in the midst of sacrifice, there are firm boundaries of empathy. You don't just take ruthlessly from creation.
It teaches the ancient Hebrews a fundamental respect for all life. And we see this ethical dimension extend beyond the animals and into the human community with the final rule regarding the Thanksgiving sacrifice.
Right, the leftover rule.
Yes. The text commands that a Thanksgiving offering must be eaten on the exact same day it is offered, with absolutely nothing left over until the morning.
Which is tough.
Wait, yeah, why force them to eat an entire Thanksgiving meal before morning? If you cook a massive meal to celebrate Thanksgiving today, the best part is eating the leftovers for the next week.
Right. I live for the leftover turkey sandwiches.
Same. But a Thanksgiving sacrifice in the ancient world was usually a large animal, like a cow or a large sheep. There is physically no way one family can consume an entire cow in a single day before the morning comes.
So what do?
It's essentially an ancient anti-hoarding mechanism disguised as a religious duty.
Ah, because the only way to fulfill the command to leave nothing until morning is to invite people over.
Exactly.
You have to pull in your neighbors, the poor, the extended household.
It forces generosity. You couldn't offer a grand sacrifice to God to show how thankful you are and then selfishly pack your freezer with the meat for the winter. You had to throw a feast and share your gratitude with the community right then and there.
The sacredness of the moment relies on your willingness to invite others in.
It brilliantly connects the vertical relationship with God directly to the horizontal relationship with the community. You cannot separate thanking the divine from feeding your neighbor.
Stepping back and looking at all of this together, it is incredibly clear that these chapters of Leviticus are far more than a dusty regulatory manual.
Oh, absolutely.
They are a profound meditation on the boundaries of community and what it really means to belong. They teach us about the sanctity of life, the contagious nature of purity, and the incredibly high standard of bringing our absolute best to the table.
Yeah, the clean room of the ancient tabernacle, the household boundaries, the unblemished animals. These were physical habits meticulously designed to shape the spiritual character of an entire nation.
Because recognizing how we treat the sacred reflects our ultimate values.
It really does. Which leaves all of us with a final question to chew on today. In our modern world, we obviously aren't bringing physical lambs or goats to a stone altar.
Not usually, no.
Right. But the principle of the unblemished offering hasn't disappeared. So what is the equivalent for you today?
That's a challenging thought.
It is. In your work, in your relationships, in your creativity, or in your spiritual life, are you bringing your absolute best? Or are you quietly trying to pass off your defective, tired leftovers as a sacred gift?
Are we giving the things that matter most our premium attention or just the scraps of our time?
Exactly. It's something to deeply consider the next time you bring something to the table. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. God blesses all of you, and we will catch you next time.